The Matthew Dark Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, praise God and welcome in. It is so good to be with you. This is the Matthew Dark Show. Now remember, hit subscribe everywhere you get your shows. Never miss an episode. YouTube, Rumble, Instagram, everything we do, it will be up there. Now, if you saw over this weekend, we saw mass protests break out. And I want to get my figures right. They're estimating a total of, 50 states, 180 cities, 8 million participants. Of course, this is the No Kings rallies across the country, describing no kings in Donald Trump or in the form of Donald Trump. Now, these are leftists. These are a movement that whatever Trump is for, they are against. So you have that dynamic. But we have a wonderful guest, and he joins us again, Adam Swart. Now, he's the founder, of Crowds on Demand. And so he knows this business, this industry intimately. And I want to get right into it, Adam. When we see something like this break out nationwide, and I saw him in nice suburbs, nice communities. I mean, this is 8 million people taking part. How does something like this even come together? And how can this even be organic without the infrastructure, the NGOs, the donations, the paid, these are paid people, but give us a breakdown of how do they put something like this together across the nation. Welcome in, sir.
Yeah, Matthew, it's really nice to be with you and your audience for the second time, I believe.
Yes.
That part is great. Look, this is a complex undertaking, and two things can be true at the same time. This requires a lot of infrastructure and a lot of money, yes, and it has people who are genuinely interested in participating. Yes. So two things can be true, right? So obviously, when you're examining the groups, I mean, Fox News had a piece that some of these groups, their revenue kind of is in the billions if you kind of talk
Yes.
about that collectively. So of course, the thing is protests can be viewed as an extension of the media ecosystem, right? So like media hosts, right? There are protesters who are sincere, right? And there are protesters who are insincere, right? But I think by and large, the people that you saw at the No Kings protests do are passionate about it. Now, you could call them wrong, you could call them boneheaded, whatever, but I think they are passionate. I think the question is that there's a ton of money behind it too. And as I'm sure we talked about last time, behind every movement, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, or none of the above, is a ton of money because essentially wealthy people and corporate interests, NGO interests attach themselves to movements because they may have philosophical agreement, yes, but they may also have a business motive for supporting that movement, right? So an example is if you go back to the BLM movement, think about all the large corporations and wealthy individuals
Yes.
who supported BLM. Well, are they actually concerned about institutional racism, or was the principal goal of that to focus on their own preservation? They were worried that they would be targeted, like like an Amazon type, companies are worried, oh well, they're going to talk about us and the poor way we treat our workers. So
Right.
instead, we're going to try to obfuscate. And I believe I saw Amazon participate. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that some of those type of people were behind, were some of the donors to BLM, but I apologize if I'm getting that wrong because I want to be accurate. But simultaneously, like if you look at the Tea Party, in the early 2010s, right, you had the Koch brothers, right? So the Tea Party was a sort of anti-government libertarian movement, but a lot of people say, okay, well, the Koch brothers were one of the big funders of that, and they had a huge business interest in deregulation because that was going to help their Coke Industries, right? So
Right.
I guess my point is that there were a lot of passionate BLM supporters, passionate Tea Party supporters. You can have a legitimate agreement, disagreement with those causes, but the billionaires who attach themselves to those causes may have some philosophical agreement, but ultimately there's also a business case for them doing it.
Yeah, I think that's well said. You do have enough people in the culture that are it's not working for them. They are getting pissed off. They're a flame ready to take off. The billionaires come in, pour gasoline on it, and boom, you get a nice 8 million body protest. So you do need both. You're right, because without those resources, they're not making the signs, the professional
No.
signs. They're not going to have their bricks and everything lined up for
They're not
them to
getting the
really.
permits, right? Well,
Right,
well, let's put the bricks part aside because that's illegal, right? So we're
right.
talking about so there, it's important that we separate lawful protests from unlawful
That's
protests, right?
fair.
So when it comes to the lawful part, right? Yes, it's expensive. I mean, if you've ever put on a large event, you'll know in order to get the permits to do that, you have to have bathrooms, you have to have security, you have to have medical, right? I mean, have you ever tried renting a porta potty? They're actually more
Yeah,
expensive than you realize, right?
yeah.
So, and imagine doing that times whatever the city is requiring based on the number of participants. So that requires a ton of money just to build that infrastructure,
Yeah.
right? So I think it's important. So okay, so that's the legitimate part of side of it. But now, you're mentioning the bricks. That's the illegitimate side of it, right? Because I mean, I guess you could have a brick at a protest and hold it, but generally a brick is you're probably using that for nefarious ends, and that's bad. And so to the extent that people are funding that part, that is unlawful, right? Um, so yeah, it's a big concern. Um,
Right.
and as you correctly said, billionaires will do two things. So number one, you're right, they'll attach themselves to a growing movement. Number two, they'll create a movement. Like the
Oh,
Tea Party was, I believe, more or less an engineered movement, right? Now it took off. Now, if you do a good job with a movement, it'll take off naturally because what you're doing is catalyzing it, right? The funding, the protests, all of that catalyze, and then it grows, and then or it fizzles, like Michael Bloomberg or Jeb Bush, right? They
right.
tried to create movements and they failed miserably because no one cared about them. Or Kamala Harris is another
Yes.
example, right? Like they just fundamentally no one was actually interested in being behind their movement, and the because the elites are often out of touch. So sometimes the elites will create a movement that is catalyze its success. And one of the things I try to do is tell my clients, because I'm in the business of catalyzing movements lawfully, of course.
Yes.
Um, I will try to tell them, hey, I don't think this is going to succeed um, because it doesn't have a broad enough appeal, because the message is too niche, right?
Yes.
And I try to help clients craft messages and create something that has a sort of a sexiness to so that it will grow, but sometimes it doesn't despite your best efforts.
Yeah, there wasn't enough hearts passionate, so it's not going to take it. And that's totally true. So you do need both an authentic, genuine concern, plus then the money to see it all the way through. I think that's well said. I think that's fair. I guess, has it always been like that? I mean, was there a moment you can go back in history and say this is where protesting organization changed and became business? I thought I read where Earth Day 1970 was the largest, one day gathering kind of on a specific cause. But can you go back to where you had truly organic? It was the people pulling their money and resources together to say, we're going to do this. Has it ever been like that?
Yeah, I think you're dreaming of a time that never
Right.
existed. So I mean, if we want to go back to the history, I mean, there are reports of the Romans and the Greeks organizing, orchestrating kind of pro demonstrations or this rallies for their own kind of betterment, right? The elites doing that. So even if you look at ancient times, this has happened, but that's harder to verify. But even if you go back to kind of the 60s, 70s, kind of which was sort of the hate when we think of the heyday of
Right.
activism. We think of the 60s and 70s, and to be sure, there were a lot of participants, but you have to keep in mind, even those were the government had a lot of informers, and the government had a lot of was shaping the movements, because
Yeah.
remember the government was shaping who, like, from especially from the civil rights standpoint, which civil rights leaders did they want to allow to advance and which ones did they not, right? So King, initially they tried to stop King, right? There was that vicious letter from Hoover, from J. Edgar Hoover, sorry, I should say
Yes.
the former director of the FBI, where they were trying to they were really trying to mess with Martin Luther King at one point, to be sure. and they were trying to delegitimize him and everything. But at some point, they realized, okay, well, King was actually maybe the better of the alternatives. Like, if we have to accept this from the
Right.
perspective of the government, so then they started pushing King, and then kind of going against Fred Hampton, and Malcolm X, kind of the more radical
Right.
element of the civil rights. So I guess not to kind of go into deep history, but to say that basically the elites already kind of were trying to shape the civil rights movement, which was one of the most effective, consequential movements of American history. So it's not that the individuals participating on for King or any of those guys were necessarily compensated or had ulterior motives, but rather that behind the scenes, those movements were being shaped and favored or disfavored by the government, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think you're onto it because that makes a lot more sense. Uh, for me, I think the 1960s were one of the most corrupt, full of lies period in America. And so it sounds a lot more realistic that they would be shaping a movement versus, oh my goodness, people woke up organically, spontaneously one day, say, we've got to protect Black folks. This is the man to lead. We don't believe any of that. And so you just kind of nailed it. We have not had independent, organic rising that was not either funded by somebody with nefarious motives or and a government shaping cultural positions is just as corrupt and just as bad, right?
Correct. I mean, I think that exactly. So I think that whether it's the government or private interest, I mean, we live in a capitalist. On the one hand, we live in a capitalist society, right? It's the
Yeah.
United States of America, and I love capitalism, right? Part of the consequence of capitalism is people who kind of have resources,
Yeah.
right, are going to try to shape things to for their own betterment, and they have sort of an advantage against the people who don't have resources. Now, one thing that is interesting about crowds on demand, like just to speak about ourselves for a second,
Yes,
is
please.
is that people always assume or often assume that we're the tool of the large interests, right? Because our services aren't cheap. But actually, what's interesting is we work more for the upstarts, the startup companies against Google, the anti-pharma health activists against big pharma, right? Like, we engineered the delete Facebook protest, which was one of the most effective
Yes.
protests holding big tech accountable for, misusing customer data and everything. And shortly thereafter, they changed their name. I mean, imagine having a
Yeah.
$1 trillion company change its name. So the thing is, if you're Google, if you're Pfizer, why do you have to protest? There's nothing for you to
Right.
protest. You run the government, right? You have every member of Congress more or less on speed dial. You have a
Yes.
revolving door of lobbyists and executive branch, legislative branch officials, right? You don't need to protest. There's nothing for you to protest, right?
Right.
It's actually protest is one of the few avenues in America that actually advantages the weaker party against the stronger institutionalized party. Because if you think about it, like, even if I have a ton of money, let's just say I have millions of dollars, I can't build an infrastructure with millions. I need billions to build
Yeah.
a political infrastructure. But if you look at the defense, tech, and pharma, they have a decades old, at this point, multi-billion dollar infrastructure that involves revolving door
Yep.
jobs, campaign contributions, all of that stuff, right? It's extremely difficult to actually build that. And what we do in order to fight back against those interests, you actually protest is one of the few things because okay, a congressperson gets contributions from big tech. They're like, oh, I want to do what big tech says. But now you have hundreds of people outside
Yes.
their door, right? Now they're like, okay, maybe it changes the calculus for them, right? So
Yes.
actually protest is a vehicle sometimes for the strong, the weaker party, the startup that's trying to take on Google, right? So to me, I think that's important. So I think it's a misnomer about my business. I like to work for the underdog more
Yes.
often than not.
And that's what I think you just hit on, this idea of, okay, we're never going to beat them with dollars and cents. Not going to happen. But bodies, a number of organized folks in an efficient, well articulated way, you hit it
Yes.
on the head. I have to respond to these 2,000 constituents or keep this money from Google. I'm not going to keep my job very long if I just watch it. So you have to be always in their ear because the little guy has never
Well,
been more
because even
steamrolled.
well, that's the thing. It's got to be strong because if they, the other thing is Google is like, okay, they're giving campaign contributions or any of these guys, but then if you lose your race and
Yeah.
you shield for big tech or big pharma, then
Oof.
you know that you have a 6, 7 figure job, probably seven or more waiting for you after you leave government service. You see what
Right.
I'm saying? So
Yes.
this is the challenge. So, but that's why but a lot of these guys nonetheless want to stay in Congress because people
Yes.
kiss your ass in a way that is just unparalleled. Well, when you're in Congress, as I know, having worked on Capitol Hill very very briefly in college, it's like they really kiss your ass. Even if you're like a nobody, they kiss your ass. So like these
Yes.
people don't want to leave. They really don't.
No, they think they're in Hollywood. They think
Yeah.
they're superstars, and they absolutely are addicted because it's free money in the form of just under the table campaign contributions, seats on boards, stock options. There's a big
Oh, wow,
pile of money
insider
just
trading.
waiting.
Right,
Yes.
correct. So the thing is that protest is actually one of the vehicles available to us that's actually that for the most part has not been infringed upon by the government, but I am very concerned that it has been under this administration and the previous
Yes.
administration have taken unprecedented steps, at least in my lifetime, to reduce the ability of people to demonstrate. I mean, under the last administration, you had Biden sticking the DOJ on the parents who were coming to school board meetings,
Yes.
right? Under this administration, you have the Department of State revoking visas for students who are
Yep.
protesting peacefully, right? And I think both of those are a very big mistake. I think the right to protest is so critical for the United States, and I really think that we're in a cycle of continuous infringement of our First Amendment
Yes.
rights. And I want to see a leader come back and say, I don't care if you opposed me. I'm going to let you do whatever, say whatever the heck you want. And I'm not going to infringe upon those rights.
Yeah,
But we
that's exactly right. And if you're not captured as a president, and both President Biden and President Trump are captured presidents, meaning they serve an entity above and beyond the American people, we can see that happening in live time. And I think you're in a serious situation if you're the MAGA voter because there's so much cognitive dissonance as far as what has happened. You just hit it on the head. That was one of the greatest free speech infringements. The college campus, you can't speak out against the government of Israel. See, in America, we have not done a good job of distinguishing. Okay, we love the Jewish people and we pray for the Jewish people to come to the Lord Jesus Christ. That's one area. The other areas, but we denounce the conduct of the Israeli government. Those two things, and I liked your line earlier, they can both be true at the same time. I can love my Jewish brother and I can say that's not okay what they're doing. And I'm not a bad person for saying that out loud. And the Trump White House said, no, you can't say that, even that. You're giving your
yeah.
pledge to them too.
Well, it's been a mistake on their part because he ran against the wokeness and cancel culture, and what you've seen is the continuation of cancel culture under this administration, which I think is really unfortunate. And what do I define? People throw around the word cancel culture a lot. I define cancel culture as um the punishment of people, especially ordinary people, not famous people, for statements made in private life, right?
Yes.
So if you're the CEO of UPS and you make some controversial political statement, well, you represent UPS, a large company, and it's reasonable to say, okay, well, maybe you should be held accountable for those statements. If you are a UPS driver, you
Right.
should only be accountable. Are you doing a good job on your route? If
Yes.
you're rude, if you're spouting off racist things on your route,
Right.
of course, that's problematic. That's not
Right.
okay. But if you are saying what you want to say on your own private social media account, on
Yeah.
your private time, I don't care what you're, I mean, I don't, I hope you don't have offensive views, but it's
Yeah.
none of my business.
That's
If you
right.
are so what cancel culture is taking private citizens, right? And I would consider a UPS driver, a flight attendant, right? Those are private citizens and saying, oh, well, you can't say this or you can't say that, right?
Right.
Whether you're a conservative who has problems with, the trans issue, or whether you're someone who has a problem or on the Israel-Palestine issue. I don't care what my thing is. I
Yeah,
don't care what your views are at all. Like, even if they're horribly offensive, if they don't get in the way of your work and you're not in a public facing role, it's none of my business what your views
agreed. It's totally agreed. And I think of cancel culture is you're wrong. We're going to shape your thinking differently. And
Yes.
it's a slow creep at the kitchen table, at the water cooler, to where it's like, wait a second, I don't know if I can say how I really feel about this topic. I think it's disgusting that mothers are aborting their children like they're going to have their nails done. That doesn't make me a bad person. It makes me pro kid and wish for a better life. And so we thought maybe, and you know how damaging it was in COVID. We were trying to warn the public. 80% of the American people took a COVID shot, many to their detriment. Okay. We know firsthand people's lives are not the same, but they wanted to squash that speech and then go just to the Israel thing. I'm so sorry. I gave a pledge to the United States. I say the Pledge of Allegiance to America, right? I would go to defend my nation, but nothing else. And so the fact that I say, hey, our kids can't afford a house. The grocery bill is now who can buy groceries, who can pay rent, who can buy a car. We're suffocating in inflation. And we know that these wars increase our cost of living. Perfect example. We're bombing Iran. I've yet to see one benefit personally, but I am paying $1 more per gallon for gas. And I never lost a night of sleep thinking about Iran having a nuclear weapon. And maybe I'm so naive, and thank you, government, for seeing something. But the fact that I say,
know whether that was a threat. We don't even know whether that was going to
well,
happen.
according to Joe Kent, there was no threat.
Yeah.
According to Lindsey Graham, this could have been any second. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. I don't want to talk about Lindsey Graham.
Me neither.
But so I guess my point is that the thing that we need, in my opinion, I'm an independent, I'm a moderate.
Yes.
I don't support either party, and I think what you need is that we need people on both sides who just say, I'm going to vote who I want to vote for, who's going to actually do what I want, rather than give some loyalty to one of these parties. Because
Yes.
what I think that MAGA voters are kind of seeing, which is the same thing as liberal voters have seen, which is that what you vote for isn't necessarily what you get. But but the thing is, if you keep voting for the person who doesn't give you what you get,
Right.
then why would that person ever want to deliver on the promises, right?
Exactly.
So I think the challenge that voters on both sides have, and I always say this, that black voters on the Democratic side, part of the reason why the Democratic Party has treated black voters so poorly is because black voters have voted 90% Democrat, right?
Yeah.
If they switch it and say, and they basically say my vote is not guaranteed to the Democratic Party, you better actually help
Yeah.
us and do what's right for our communities and do what's right for not just the elite of our community but all of our community, right? Then the Democrats would actually start having to deliver. But I think when you think about rural white voters, the MAGA base voter, right, the ex-urban
Yeah.
white voter, right, that's typically considered the MAGA base, although there is a diversity as well in that.
Sure.
You know, that person has not necessarily gotten a lot of what they wanted.
None.
It feels like the administration has delivered very well for the Palm Beach
Yep.
type voters, but not necessarily for the middle America voters.
The average MAGA voter is getting slapped in the face with lies and coming back and say, I'll have another. That's what they're doing right now. And there's going to be a moment where they say, hold on a second. We've now jumped the shark. We've crossed a line. And I think we're getting closer and closer. This is where I want to end it on you, because you will have insight for us. I'm wondering if you know or see or can kind of foresee that next movement that's kind of brewing in the hearts that could take off with the right capital. I mean, is it a third party of disgruntled people, or what is it?
It's exactly what we were just talking about. The real question is the MAGA base going to maybe grow some balls and
Yes,
form another party?
they'll
That
need to.
because it feels like the so one thing is like, look, I'm from California. I know a lot about the liberals, right? I'm less experienced. I've worked with a lot of conservatives. I know about conservatives, but the difference between the far left, the progressives, and the moderates tends to be how far do we go in one direction? Like, do we do universal health care or do we do single payer? Do we have a bit of more military spending or a bit less? Whereas I think there's a real disconnect between the neocon and the MAGA base. And I'm not even taking a position on it, but
Yeah.
it feels like the sort of Lindsey Graham voters, as they said, we're going to kill the right people and we're going to lower your taxes. That's what they want.
Right.
Right. So that's what Lindsey Graham said. We're killing all
Mhm.
the right people and we're lowering your taxes. Well, okay, that's one philosophy. And I don't know what percentage of the Republican Party that is, right? The Graham, Sean Hannity, that
Mhm.
group. But it does feel that that group is who is controlling the party. And then it feels like there's really nothing for the Tucker Carlson, Joe Kent, Marjorie Taylor
Right.
Greene, Thomas Massey wing. So my question is at some point, is that group going to basically be like, sorry, we're not going to take lip service anymore,
Yes.
and we're going to kind of form our own thing, and we're basically going to say we're not going to vote for the Republican candidate. We're going to have a third party. Um, because the reason that hasn't happened on the Democratic Party is because ultimately the progressives and the moderates agree. They tend to just disagree on how far to go. Whereas that's my diagnosis
Right.
is but they're conceptual. A lot of moderate Democrats are actually progressive Democrats who just favor compromise, who would be progressive. It's just they like Obama, right? Obama's a progressive, but he governed as a moderate, in my
Yeah.
mind, because he felt like, okay, well, let's get something done, not because we can't get everything done. The difference
Right.
is the Hannity Graham wing feels just completely different from the Tucker wing, right? The
Yes.
only thing that they sort of agree on is cultural issues, right?
Right.
The trans issue, but
That's about it.
I don't even know how sincere the Hannity Graham wing
No.
is about the cultural issue versus just sort of using that because to get votes, right? So the question is, it feels like you have two different parties. My question is, will they actually split? So if there is going to be a new movement, that's the movement because it feels like it's undeniable. The Iran war is sort of the feels to me like it should be the last straw for the
Absolutely.
MAGA base to separate from the other group, right? And I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm an
Yeah.
independent, but I'm just looking objectively and I'm seeing the MAGA base. I'm like, you haven't really gotten anything that you asked for. So it's kind
No,
of
no, no, no.
it's almost
When
a
they I think you're dead on it. We've reached that moment. Trump was on super thin ice, meaning he had to be perfect after what he chose to do with the Epstein files. That was a deliberate, intentional choice to make
yeah.
a mess of this, delay this, and then all of a sudden we're in war. I'm of the opinion if he had 100 million fans, he's probably down to 50. And that isn't going to cut it. He needed 75 million to beat Kamala Harris. And that's maybe the worst candidate ever
That was
presented, right?
easy.
And he needed all of them. And now he has pissed off at least half of his people. And so the question is not that they're going to go vote for Democrats. Will they even vote at all under this two-party system? And they say, you know what? I'll just keep my money, and just be done with all of it. Let Democrats rule again, and maybe that will fire. Because when Democrats were in charge and we had drag queen story hour in the classroom, when we had BLM destroying cities, MAGA people, patriots, conservatives were activated. They had a passion to get their country back. They thought it was over. Donald Trump won, and they've been nothing but betrayed ever since. So it's going to be fascinating how they respond in November.
It'll be fascinating. The one last thing to add is that I was kind of interested in a lot of these like Senate races where Trump won the state but the Republican lost
Yeah.
because I was like, wait a second, but I was recently turned on, not recently, but a lot of people that I had met said they just went to the ballot box, voted for Trump. They didn't vote for anybody else.
Right.
They voted for Trump. They just put their ballot out with. They didn't even bother voting down the line. I just feel like those people are not going to go turn out in this
No.
year and vote for Republican in the midterms, and then they're going to have some trouble. So I think that
Yes.
so if you're asking me to end my prediction is I think you're going to have some measure of movement come from that part of the Trump coalition, the former Trump coalition. So
And I think you're right, because when Republicans lose majority in November, there's going to be a panic setting in and a clock started for 2028. Now, JD Vance has the exact same playbook. He talks better about these issues, but it's going to be simple. Do this or else. So we'll connect for sure before November as we get a little closer and see. Now, I want you to make sure all the people can find you. Our guest is Adam Swart, founder, Crowds on Demand. What's all the places people can follow you, connect with you, and do everything there?
Crowdsondemand.com and on Twitter at CEO Adam Swart. It's been a pleasure, Matthew.
Absolutely. Have a great day. We'll see you again, folks, and do this until next time. Serve God, help others, stay good. Goodbye. God bless everybody.
Thanks.
See you, man.
The Matthew Dark Show, your one-stop show for truth, courage, fellowship, and faith. Available everywhere you get your podcasts.